The moment that still replays in my head happened at the dinner table, with everyone watching. My dad leaned back in his chair, laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all day, and said, "Your sister earned everything on her own. Unlike you." The room went quiet. My mom stared at her plate, my sister smirked, and I felt something inside me snap so hard I almost heard it. I leaned back too, smiled in a way that surprised even me, and realized that this was the exact second my relationship with my family changed forever. So tell me honestly, was I wrong for what I did next? Or would you have done the same thing in my place? I'm going to rewind, because nothing about this explosion makes sense without the full picture. Growing up, it was always the four of us. My dad, my mom, my older sister, and me. On the outside, we looked like a perfectly normal middle-class family. Inside, though, there was a very clear hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. My sister was 3 years older than me, and from as far back as I can remember, she was the golden child. She was smart, confident, loud, and competitive. Teachers praised her, relatives compared me to her, and my dad practically glowed whenever he talked about her achievements. I was quieter, more introverted, and honestly just different. I liked reading, working alone, and figuring things out at my own pace. To my dad, that translated to lazy, unmotivated, and weak. My mom tried to be neutral, but her version of neutral was staying silent whenever my dad went on one of his lectures, and there were many. If my sister got an A, my dad would take us out for ice cream. If I got an A, he'd say, "Good, but don't get comfortable." If my sister messed up, there was always an excuse. If I messed up, it became a lesson about how I needed to be more like her. Over time, I stopped trying to impress him because nothing was ever enough. But the irony is, I never stopped working hard. I just stopped doing it where he could see. After high school, my sister went to a prestigious university. My parents helped her with tuition, rent, and even a car. The story they told everyone was that she had earned it through scholarships and hard work. The truth was more complicated, but no one wanted to hear that. When it was my turn, I chose a cheaper college and worked part-time to cover most of my expenses. I didn't ask for help, partly out of pride and partly because I already knew the answer. My dad loved to tell people that I was independent, but what he really meant was that he didn't need to invest in me. College was hard. I worked nights, studied during the day, and barely slept. There were times I wanted to quit, times I felt completely invisible. But something about being underestimated lit a fire in me. I started learning skills outside of class, teaching myself things that weren't even part of my degree. I failed a lot, quietly, without anyone cheering me on or catching me when I fell. But I also grew in ways my family never noticed because they weren't looking. After graduation, my sister landed a job through one of my dad's connections. He loved to tell that story too, but somehow it always came out sounding like she had done it all herself. I struggled at first, bouncing between jobs, trying to find my footing. Every family gathering turned into an interrogation. "So what are you doing now? Any real job yet? Have you thought about going back to school?" My sister would sit there, successful and smug, and my dad would beam at her like she was living proof that he'd done everything right as a parent. Then something shifted. Slowly, quietly, without any announcements, my efforts started paying off. I got into a niche field that most people didn't understand, including my family. The pay wasn't flashy at first, but the growth potential was huge. I kept my head down and kept working. Promotions came, so did raises. I paid off my student loans. I moved into a nicer place. I started saving aggressively. I didn't post about it. I didn't brag. Part of me still hoped that one day, my dad would notice on his own and say he was proud of me. Looking back, that was probably the saddest part. The tension finally boiled over at that dinner I mentioned earlier. We were celebrating my sister buying her first house. My parents had helped with the down payment, of course, but the narrative was that she was completely self-made. Someone, I don't even remember who, joked about how different my sister and I were. My dad took that opening and ran with it. He laughed, leaned back, and said the words that cut deeper than anything he'd said before. "Your sister earned everything on her own, unlike you." I felt my face burn. Years of swallowed anger, disappointment, and resentment rushed to the surface. I leaned back too, mostly so I wouldn't explode forward, and I smiled. Not a happy smile, but a calm one. Inside, I was done. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just said, "Yeah, you're right." The look on his face told me he hadn't expected that. The rest of the dinner was awkward, and I left early with a knot in my chest that felt like both grief and relief. After that night, I stopped trying to prove myself to my family. I also stopped hiding. Over the next year, my career skyrocketed. I took risks, started a side business, and invested wisely. The numbers in my bank account grew to the point where even I had to double-check them. Meanwhile, my sister's situation wasn't as perfect as it looked. Her mortgage was huge, her job was stressful, and she relied heavily on my parents for support. They were stretched thin, but my dad refused to acknowledge it. This is where I want to pause and bring you into it. So that was the situation I was in. Years of being belittled, a lifetime of being compared, and one final comment that pushed me over the edge. Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you about the decision I made that changed everything, I want you to stop for a second and ask yourself what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have confronted them, cut them off, or done what I did? What I did was wait. Not out of fear, but out of strategy. The opportunity came when my parents started struggling financially. They hadn't planned well for retirement, and helping my sister had drained more resources than they expected. One evening, my dad called me, not to ask how I was, but to ask for help. He framed it as a temporary loan, something small, something that family does for each other. I listened quietly. Then I told him I'd think about it. A week later, I invited my parents and my sister over to my place. It was the first time they'd seen where I lived. My dad's eyes widened when he walked in. The place was modern, spacious, and clearly expensive. My sister looked around too, confusion replacing her usual confidence. We sat down and my dad finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. How can you afford this? I took a deep breath and told them everything. My job, my business, my savings. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't downplay it either. The room was silent again, but this time it felt different. My dad looked stunned. My sister looked threatened. Then my dad laughed, awkwardly, and said, "Well, I guess you did okay after all." That's when I leaned back again, just like at that dinner months before, and said calmly, "I earned everything on my own." Unlike some people, I wasn't even looking at my sister when I said it. I was looking straight at my dad. The realization hit him hard. I could see it in his face. For the first time, the narrative he'd built didn't hold. They still asked for the money, and this was the hardest part. I said no, not out of spite, but out of boundaries. I explained that I was willing to help them plan, to connect them with resources, but I wasn't going to bail anyone out financially. My dad got angry. My sister accused me of being selfish. My mom cried, and I stayed calm because for once I was in control. The aftermath was messy. There were phone calls, guilt trips, and long silences. Eventually, things settled into a new normal. My parents adjusted. My sister struggled but learned to stand on her own more. And my dad changed slowly. He never gave me a dramatic apology, but he stopped laughing at me. He started asking questions. Sometimes, late at night, I think he finally understands. Now looking back, I don't feel victorious. I feel free. I learned that you don't need validation from people who refuse to see you. Sometimes the best response isn't yelling or proving them wrong in the moment. Sometimes it's quietly building a life so solid that their words lose all power. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Like this video if you were on my side. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.